Hey, you're Addison, Brazil.
Yeah, I am. Hi, random British guy.
Didn't you write First Year at Grief Club, a gift from a friend who gets it?
Yes, I did. Did my mom pay you to ask me that?
No, I'm sorry for your loss, mate. Why don't you do a podcast to help people honor their grief?
You know, you're not the first person to say that. You know what? Fine, I'll do it. But it has to be with my friends who get it. And it has to be for real people who get real life grief. Oh, and it absolutely has to be equal parts honor the journey and find the funny.
What does that mean?
I think you're about to find out. I'm Addison, Brazil. Grief Club, the podcast starts now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Grief Club, the podcast, where we take the weekly experiments offered in my book, First Year of Grief Club, A Gift from a Friend Who Gets It, and use it as a launching point for a deeper conversation with special guests. Today's episode is inspired by week 8 of the book, and week 8 is the very first time that I acknowledge linear time, and I invite the members of Grief Club to really check in, and not in a way to measure their grief or how their grief is going, but in a way to start to notice which of the experiments are really working, what tools have been identified in the grief process, and really just how they've started to get to know themselves within the grief process. With that being said, I invited my dear friend, badass author, host of the Rebel Souls podcast, a woman who I'd say checked in actually so deeply, she decided to check out of her corporate life as the CMO of Harley Davidson Worldwide and go on a sabbatical, which I also since have been inspired to do. Shelley's book, A Corporate Rebel's Guide to Finding Your Best Life is available everywhere books are. And without further ado, welcome, Shelley.
Hello, soul brother. Thank you for
Hello.
inviting me on. I love that you're doing this.
Thank you. So I always want to make a point throughout the book. We have these conscious emotional fitness check-ins, something that I'm just very accustomed to doing. I think it's just always really important for both us and the listeners to just pause, kind of check in with where we're really at so we know where we're going in the conversation and where it's coming from. So if you want to join me in taking a deep breath. And in one word, I'm going to ask you, how are you feeling right now physically?
Physically, I feel a little sore.
I'm going to say tense for me. What about one word for emotionally?
Emotionally, I feel buoyant. I don't know where that word just came from, but I feel it, and I felt it probably because I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna say mushy, or mushy, which is a word I made up that's actually in the book, which is a swirly feeling. And one word for how you're feeling mentally.
Oh, mentally is a tough one for me today. Mentally, I'm feeling foggy. I'm on day 4 of a cleanse, so foggy.
Amazing. Mentally, one word. I'm like, can mental be my word? I'm with you. Our sibling connection is right there. Yeah, it's swirly. I'm definitely swirly. Yeah, so as you know, my goal with these is to keep these episodes manageable and digestible because like the book, this podcast is an extension, but still something that's made for real life and real life grief. So before we get into the meat of things, though, I do want to start by just inviting you to honor your journey a little bit, share with us what you will, just about how grief has touched your life, maybe, you know, how it's defined in your life and how it shows up right now, if at all. I always remind you and the listeners that I define grief personally as the loss of anything meaningful. So it's not always a physical death, but, you know, a rite of passage, a job, a relationship, a pet, anything. So yeah, I just want to, whatever kind of honoring your journey, and by that I mean sharing your journey with us in a few minutes. I'd love to just let our listeners hear a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you. And honestly, you know this, and I'm going to share with your listeners. I mean, so much of what I know today about grief is from you, and I'm super grateful for that. So thank you for helping me understand that grief is more than losing someone, and that's sometimes the hardest grief. But what's so interesting is you've really helped me process a lot, a lot of what I didn't understand as grief, and I now do understand as grief. So, for example, for anybody who's read my book, and if you haven't, I talk about a significant event, a life-changing event that happened while I was in the midst of this early stages of my sabbatical, about 8 months in, as I was really reconnecting with my own soul and trying to understand what I was meant to do on this planet. My dad had a very severe stroke, followed by another stroke. That was about 4.5 years ago, as we record today. And what I didn't understand until you came into my life, Addison, until I really, really understood and understood from you, and then read your book and got even deeper into it. I didn't understand that I am still grieving the loss of my dad, even though I didn't lose my dad. Right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I hadn't thought about it in those terms until you and I were connected a couple years ago and started going down this journey on this journey together. And so it's been really powerful for me to understand it's okay to still feel this way 4.5 years later, because the person my dad was and the role that he played in our family prior to July 4th, 2017 is very, very different. It's beautiful. And it's a gift that he's still in our lives and he's still teaching us so much. But his life and his role in our family is so incredibly different. The phone calls I used to get from my dad on his way home from some board meeting, the trips we used to go on as families, like every Thanksgiving, we would go to the Caribbean and we'd celebrate Thanksgiving together in this spectacular place with our feet in the sand. None of that is happening anymore. My dad is largely, requires caregiving every day, can't use a phone, can't read, is mostly confined to a wheelchair. And yet I know there's a gift in that, because it was also the gift that made me think, man, if I'm not going to live my truth today, like if not now, then when? And it was a huge wake up for me. And yet I know I'm still grieving the loss of the guy I used to be able to call for business advice and talk to about all these things, and who I wanted to climb Machu Picchu with and all the things. So yeah, that's my present day grief.
I really thank you for sharing that. And the timing is so odd, because I just actually read a DM from a reader whose father has also suffered a stroke, and they've been dealing with his current condition for the last year. And she said, like, everybody doesn't understand why I'm reading your book or why I feel like I'm grieving. And I'm like, absolutely. And like you said, it's without that acknowledgement, without that rite of passage of like a funeral and that public acknowledgement. It's sort of the silent grief process that has, and it's very personal, because physically the person is still present. I know that well too from my own journey. There was a time where my brother had stopped talking and stopped communicating, really, when his brain tumor sort of took over that part of his brain, to when he actually physically left us. And there's that whole grief process in between, and kind of honoring that. So thank you for sharing that. I also I feel like just with your journey specifically too, you had to honor a lot. And I'm just wondering, because you took a big step, leaving corporate and writing the book and being a badass and going out into the world and doing what you're doing, liberating one soul at a time. What was that grief like, in terms of just like the shift or the change in something so meaningful, and not even, it doesn't have to be meaningful, but just so regular, so routine, so every damn day?
Totally. Well, if I think back to some of the hardest work that I had to do when I left Harley. So I left Harley 5.5 years ago. I've been on this journey since then. It's become, a business, a mission, a movement, a book. It's about to become another book that I'm in the process of writing. When I think back to the early days, the hardest work that I had to do was to untangle or disentangle, whatever the right word is, my identity, I'm struggling with the word to explain it. I'm going to blame the cleanse, but anyway, it's life and I'm human and I'm struggling to find my words. So let me say that again. So I didn't realize when I left Harley how wrapped up like my self-worth and my value was in my identity as this corporate badass executive. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, I guess my whole identity was wrapped up in, serving global iconic brands because that's what I had done for 26 years. It was wrapped up in titles because I'd had some pretty sexy titles and I had a lot of global jobs and I got to, fly on fancy planes around the world and ride motorcycles for 6.5 of those years and all of those things. And I did not realize that is how I was defining myself. And now that you say this, I also didn't realize in the moment that I was grieving that identity because the only way I could move forward on this journey of soulbatical, which basically soulbatical is a way of being. It's choosing to live more authentically, courageously and purposefully, like you and I do, right? Like I invite everybody to do. And I had to grieve the loss of this corporate Shelley in order to invite in soulful Shelley.
Mm-hmm. It's because even if it's positive, I mean, I've had similar situations, obviously, where even if it's positive, there's still a grief, there's still an honoring of what was and what was meaningful, even to that version of yourself. And we skip over that, if we leave a job by choice, if we don't leave a job by choice. And honestly, just for me, the find the funny of this is sometimes, right now I'm speaking, I'm an author, I have autonomy, there's so many great things. People are like, you're traveling, I'm jealous of your life. And there's just days where I'm in bed at 9:30 a.m. still, and I'm like, no one would care or know if I was even alive right now. I don't there's no daily stand-up call. There's no strategy session, starting the day where I'm like, whoa, yeah, I'm grieving the idea that that's what meant I mattered, that, and having that validation of simply being alive every morning. If you're not here, even if you'd get in trouble, yeah, exactly.
Completely. So. I mean, the amount of, the recognition or the realization that I was measuring my worth and my value by how full my calendar was so scary to me. And so I offer that to anybody. When you get in that cycle, I used to say crazy busy, I'm crazy busy all the time. People would ask me, to have lunch or dinner or, travel or do something. They'd be like, oh, let me get back to you. I'm just crazy busy right now. But it was a constant state. And I only realized when I left Harley that it was a constant state because I was creating that. That to me meant that was my worth. That was my value. That must mean I'm a big shot doing really important things, which as we know is total bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely. And even both of us, because I think with my work in the startup, and we both loved our jobs that kept us so busy. And I think there is a duality to it because I love so much of what my life is right now. I love that the book has come out and, it's created this opportunity to connect with so many people, but there can be this duality where it's the same of longing for summer break in high school. I just grieve the structure and the community and that, yeah, I was working 17 hours a day and I was crazy busy too, not time for anything else, but also blissfully at points, where it's just I'm working on something I love and I miss just the team being all in. And so there's just that grief that shows up and it doesn't get talked a lot about the grief, especially with how often we transition career-wise nowadays. It's not like we live in a time where, you have the same job for 50 years, it's happened so often. And that's, you've set up a community, a whole life there. So I just wanted to touch on that, because for me to check in, as the launching point of the conversation, that is something I've been checking in a lot about lately. It's just those shifts. And as I build my life, like what is important to me and where can I look for the opportunities to have that sense of community, to have those check-ins, but have my autonomy and still be able to make impact, and it's such an odd feeling to, I have to literally separate, like that's okay. I'm honoring grief around how things used to be structured, because there was safety in it and I loved it and there was impact there. But that grief doesn't mean I don't like what I'm doing now, or I need to bail or shift. So it's very interesting. And sometimes the correlation is easier when you're talking about work than, the loss of a loved one or
and if I can add to that, I think I love this idea that sometimes we're grieving as we up level, right? We're on this journey of wanting to up level in our lives, whatever that means for you. And when we up level, it means we are inevitably letting go of things that are no longer serving us. So we're having these micro grief moments constantly in order to embrace what will serve us going forward, what will serve who we are becoming. And so I hadn't really thought about it that way until in the moment as you were talking. I was like, yeah, that's right. So I don't regret anything I've done. That 26-year corporate career served me so well and so powerfully. It got me here on this journey today. And yet letting go of it was a grief process. And every day in my life and my business, as an author, as a speaker, as a movement maker, I'm letting go of things that no longer serve me. So you're right, we're kind of in this constant grief cycle, which is a beautiful way to think about it. And you help us through it.
And when you're checking in, it reminds me of something. I think I may have even talked about this on your podcast, which everybody should check out. But this idea of these two lonelies that kind of inspire us to change and make those big shifts in life. There's the loneliness you feel that you start the inner work, or you look for healing and you go out into the world looking for something. And then there's that second loneliness that people rarely talk about, which we're kind of indirectly talking about, is when you've started to really do that inner work, or you have, and you look back and you're like, oh, but all those things that weren't serving me was what I thought my identity was. And I feel really lonely. And I've identified, what energies serve me and don't. And, so certain people haven't come along, and there's a true grief and loneliness, even though it's out of a state of empowerment. It's like you still grieve, your limited beliefs being shed. You still grieve like that stuff happened. It's like, really, it feels so silly to me, but I'm like, so wait, you're upset that you're not a person anymore who gets upset about these things. And it's like, yeah, man, a little bit like ignorance was also bliss in a way, so there's those two lonely, and it's cool to just maybe check in which lonely. I know like grief can really amplify and start more of that first lonely for people, but not always. It can be an eruption of that second lonely, where it's really showing you in this moment in the world, because there has been a death or a loss of some sort, what is serving you, who is supporting you, and who's really there for you. That can be a whole nother grief that kind of slithers alongside the big snake of grief that everybody thinks that you're dealing with. I
love what you said, beautifully said. And what you just said made me think and in the darkness of grief, there are these beautiful illuminating moments. Right? What is serving me? Who is supporting me? There's a lot of clarification that happens in these moments. So that feels like something to look for when you're ready in the process.
It's funny because I was considering getting maybe in post an air horn noise for anytime things start to sound because I hate everything happens for a reason, or this is a gift, or those things. But But what you're saying is so in alignment with how I feel and what I say in the book, where just because you acknowledge what you learn and how you grow from this doesn't mean it's good that it happened, you know?
Totally.
And it's like to just constantly, because I know that can be such a, if you hear it the wrong way and you're grieving, like a cringe and shut it off. Like, no, there's no silver lining. Like these people aren't experiencing real grief. And I would shut it off. Like, you know, I just would be like, I'm not getting to a point where I'm like, it's great that my brother passed because now I blank. Like, you know, I couldn't do that. And so it's like, I always like to just like point out, because our natural idea is to go to, oh, like there's silver lining right now, but we're not. We're saying that within that process, you know, it's safe to acknowledge like those little gifts without it being a gift that the loss has occurred, you know?
Right.
And so I just, you know, want to check back in with all the listeners and be like, we got you. That's, you know, we're in Grief Club too, and that's definitely how we feel.
You've reached Grief Club. Leave a message after the beep.
Hey Grief Club, it's Addy. Yeah, I am back talking during the ad, which should be your well-deserved break from listening to me talk, but we know sometimes that's not how it works. I just wanted to say, if you are really enjoying this, if you are feeling connected, a little less isolated and going, I only get this once a week, how can I stay connected throughout the rest of the week? The answer is social media. Now remember, when you're using social media, we want to use conscious consumption, and that's what I always promise at Share My Grief Club. I'll put it in the show notes. Anything that I don't create, I consciously curate, and it's all designed to help people on their way, to honor their journey, and if all else fails, find the funny. We'll see you there.
So this idea of checking in, which, you know, is like the loose launching point for this episode. I was excited to talk to you specifically because I know you just have so many cool Shelley Paxton wisdom bites in your toolkit. And honestly, yeah, what you've created for yourself in your toolkit, the tools you offer in the book and just generally through your work, you know, it shows that sort of, I don't know, I'm picturing right now it's visual, not words, which is just great for podcasting, isn't it? When something's visual, but, you know, like sea glass, you know, over time, you continue to really use these ideas and concepts and tools. And when you explain the things that you use, which I know we're going to get into one of them, you know, it's just so clear that it's like that sea glass metaphor. It's something that you've really gotten to a point where the edges aren't rough anymore and it's smooth and it fits into your life, and it's something that really serves you and allows you to check in with yourself. So that's why I was like so excited to have you on for this one specifically. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're going to offer to the Grief Club today in terms of an actionable tool?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. And Addison, you've heard me talk about this before because it truly is a daily practice in my life. And so it's one of the things I find myself talking about most often. And I thought, wow, maybe this is actually one of the things that's gotten me through grief when you asked me about it. So I have some right here. I personally take orange Post-it notes because orange is my favorite color. It's all around me if you're watching the video of this. And I ask myself a question in the morning, and you can do this multiple times a day, but I, at a bare minimum, start my morning with what I call permission slip. So I think about each one of these Post-its as a permission slip I'm writing to myself. And so I'm asking myself the question, what do I need to do, not do, or allow myself to feel in order to show up as my most badass, powerful self today? And I hadn't really made the connection until you and I started talking about this episode. I thought, wow, that was giving myself permission and therefore giving myself grace to experience and feel whatever I was feeling, or give myself permission to say, you know what, I'm just not up to that today. I'm not ready for that meeting. That social engagement, I feel drained. I feel down. I feel like being in my bed at 9:30 in the morning, or maybe in my bed at 8:30 or 5:30 in the evening. I feel it's really a check-in point. So this is another way of doing a check-in, to use your language. to say, I've checked in. I love this practice after your check-in. Do the mental, physical, emotional check-in, and then say, based on what just came up, what do I need to give myself permission for today to do, not do, or feel? And I found these beautiful, and I do it on Post-it notes because I literally stick them up in my workspace or on my refrigerator or highly trafficked areas, wherever. Maybe sometimes they need to be on my bathroom mirror, whatever it is, so that I remind myself. It's also a powerful tool if you're going into a big meeting or something that's going to take a lot of your energy, a lot of your presence. What do you need to do, not do, or allow yourself to feel in order to show up as your most powerful self?
Actually write it out. Like it's actually written out, and it's something that you can visually see. And obviously in the book, I play with this idea of gray space a lot. And I feel like it being on a post-it has that same kind of feel. This isn't permanent. This is where you're at today. This permission only lasts as long as you leave it, stuck up or on your desk. So I love that idea. So you actually give yourself permission. So just one more time, the 3 things that you give yourself permission slips for.
Yeah.
What are the 3?
So what do I need to do, not do, or allow myself to feel in order to show up as my most badass self today?
So right now, when you say that, what comes up for me, and I'm going to try to do this as much as possible because, I am in the grief arena with the others, I'm not studying from above. So, and sometimes this will get awkward because the experts are going to really make me do things that will be vulnerable. But when you say that, what comes up to me, I truly, from the inner child of myself was like, I need to write myself a permission slip that it's okay for me to cry when I'm ready. I have that weird physical feeling like, oh, what if it happens right now? As soon as you say it. But I truly feel like, so I'm going to write down. So I would literally write down, I give you permission to cry when you're ready.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to leave that for myself, honestly, because it's like right there at that, and it's rumbling, and even like in a movie where you try and it's like, no, it's bad acting. It's just like, it is like, a stormy day in London where it's going to happen when it's going to happen. But that's
beautiful. I love it. It's a beautiful example of like, I'm going to allow myself to feel that emotion when it comes up. I'm going to allow myself to express that emotion when it wants to appear that way. I love that. And by the way, you can write multiple permission slips. There are days where I have my whole work area covered in permission slips because it's that kind of day. And that's okay, because it's okay to not wake up every day feeling like, I got this. I mean, I love saying I got you and we got you because we do. And at the same time, you and I wake up on some days and we're just like, I need you. I need help. Like you and I have a beautiful relationship where we can text each other and just be like, I'm having that kind of day.
Yeah.
And I think it's really vulnerable for us to say that before we started recording this podcast, both of us were like, we're in the midst of cleanses. We're feeling really foggy and lightheaded and distracted and all of that. And we gave ourselves permission to come on and simply be ourselves and have whatever conversation wants to be had in that moment. So I feel like we're modeling.
Yeah,
this.
No, for real. It's actually a little bit too weird for me right now. It's like meta. I have 2 things. And it's so funny. I just want to say to anyone listening too, that the power of this permission slip already is kind of freaking me out. And that I'm like the kid in church that laughs when you're supposed to cry. But it's literally this thing, I give you permission to cry when you're ready, is now staring at me. And it really does feel like permission. I feel like as soon as I, exit from this, that I'm gonna take up this permission slip. So that's really cool. Now, I love that you brought up today because, I struggle with this, and I think a lot of people might struggle with this is, okay, these permission slips, imagine, a 3rd grader could write their own permission slips. I mean, know this class for the rest of time. I mean, that's just an easy way out of everything, right? So what is your personal litmus test, or what would you offer to people when they're kind of going, am I giving myself permission to just not do anything that is at all uncomfortable, or like for instance, a good example is this recording today. Yes, there were external things for both of us, and we both had parts of our brain that were like, is this a moment where we listen and give permission to rest, or is this like do it? And I already know from what we talked about so far that it was obvious that we were meant to do it. So that makes me want to ask, like, you know, what is your litmus test for that, when it's like, I don't know, when it's right to give the permission slip, you know, to not do.
Yeah, it's such a good question. This came up in a workshop I was doing down in Baja, actually. And somebody's like, well, I could basically say, you know, I don't want to do my taxes, or I'm not going to do that big meeting, or I'm not going to stand in front of that camera, because a lot of these things feel very scary to us. A lot of them are pushing us toward our growth edge. And my answer to it was, this is part of the reason why it is such a beautiful practice to slow down and check in. So it circles back to the check-in for me. I sometimes do them the way that you do them, but really it's when we give ourselves permission to slow down. I mean, close your eyes, slow down, and really listen and feel into your body the truth. It doesn't lie. And so that's what I did when you and I were going back and forth today. And mostly we were kind of laughing at each other. And then we were laughing that we were in almost exactly the same space at the same time, an ocean apart. And when I really checked in, I felt this strong soul nudge that we are meant to have this conversation. And whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And at the end of the day, we could just push delete, or you could throw away the recording. There was no harm in us doing this. So my check-in was, I often will get these soul nudges, and the more often you pause and check in, the louder that inner voice becomes, the more you start to feel things in your body. And I say, listen deeply.
I think too, you can look what you're saying exactly. If you're questioning it too, as you're saying that, it's coming up for me. If you're doing like a conscious emotional check-in and the words coming up for emotionally are scared or mentally nervous, like that's an indication, you know, that this isn't something that maybe you shouldn't do or give yourself permission to get out of, but something that you care a lot about the result around. And so there's a way to approach it. There's like a way to honor it. My find the funny side is just like thinking of all the permission slips I want to write myself as soon as we get off the phone. It's gonna like, I give you permission to end the 16 to 8 hour fasting. I give you permission to have cacio e pepe for the rest of the week for every meal. I give you just all the things. You know, so that, like, you know, I think as always, it can feel like there's so much to do and so much that comes with just like survive, never mind thinking about thriving within grief, but just like getting through that. I just always, you know, want to remind people that all of these concepts, like when you're reading the book, like people don't know until they'll start listening to the podcast or until my audiobook comes out, like the exact tone, but everything is just like a gentle, friendly offering, and kind of like almost like tongue in cheek, like, let me know if it works for you, because not everything does, you know? So exactly, where rip the page out, take the Post-it down, whatever it is. And based on your check-in, where you're at in your journey, make decisions around what serves you. So I'm definitely gonna put, and I love that you brought this up today, because I've heard you talk about these permission slips in Baja, where I got to be lucky enough to, like, you know, hear you speak and be in workshop with you, but then also in your book and just in general. And like, I'm like, oh, I wish someone told me about permission slips right now. So like, it's just, the repetition is so real. So it's like, write it down, like go back to it, because sure enough, you'll stop giving yourself permission, you know, in a few weeks or a few months, and then, you know, not know what you're missing, almost grieving. And it's like, oh yeah, what was that thing, you know, from that podcast? And it's like, I'm going to give myself permission to use permission slips again. I'm gonna do that, because I literally, like, as much as my find the funny is like calling right now and wants me to be like a total ass, the other side of me is like, bro, there's like some serious things that I want permission for, like as soon as we get off this call. One of which is the permission to celebrate that we did do this conversation.
Yeah.
Despite the back and forth, you know, and like, I don't give myself that kind of permission as much as I would like to say I do, and definitely not as much as I encourage other members of my community or my family or my friends to do. I mean, I'm like, you got to celebrate everything. And it's like, you know, I'm here right now being like, I feel like I need a serious permission slip to just celebrate what did happen today, and just this conversation in general. So I love that.
I'm celebrating that too. I love celebrating the small wins. And you're right. In my work, I remind everybody how important that is. And find the funny for me is, oh, Jesus, Shelley, like how often do you forget to do that for yourself? Like completely forget to celebrate the small wins and just look past them. And I think showing up powerfully for ourselves and others is a small win. And also showing up really vulnerably, like for me to feel like I'm not 100% myself today, and yet go, that's okay, because I'm showing up as deeply human as are you. I mean, is there really any other way to show up?
No, and especially and in a safe space. I will also be honest that well, it's my space, so I hope it will be safe. But like, you know, knowing it was with you, like this is happening a lot lately where, you know, if I was honoring my journey, I might be giving myself permission to excuse myself in other ways. But then when I really look at it, I'm going, whoa, no, but I've really started to set up my life where everything that I'm involved in is sort of a safe space. So why wouldn't you show up like this? Why wouldn't you see what this leads to? And that's kind of a cool thing. And I do want to say too, for anybody listening, that I also just had such a mind fuck around the idea of celebrating and grief. Like those two sentences going together, like that's just, it's hard to sort of correlate and process. It's like I always say, running Mac on Windows or Windows on Mac, whatever you prefer. But you're not celebrating the grief as in the grief happening, but just any sense of awareness or action that's coming out of it. And just like, again, celebrate that you gave yourself a permission slip, that you decided to take a step towards checking in, celebrate that you checked in. And it's really silly, but like there's a lot of science around just like the actual practice of celebrating after you do things that serve you, because it signals to your whole body that like, this is good for me, and creates a new pattern. So as silly as it is, when you admit that you're like rotting from the inside out and your grief is taking over, to do like a Carlton dance right after, scientifically speaking, you know, is going to help anchor in that to your whole being, that, you know, checking in serves me. And even when the check-in is maybe grueling or just really, really vulnerable, that's something to celebrate, that you were doing it, that you were taking the moment to do it, whether it's silently with yourself or in a group with other people in your personal grief club, or just in general. You know, I mean, I hope that these check-ins, I know it's a part of the corporate culture that I started to build at my last company, but you know, it's a part of how every day starts and how it moves forward. All right, I don't know if anything's going to come to you or not, but I promised myself, I actually gave myself a professional permission slip, that if I was ever to do this Going Deeper podcast, that it would have to be equal parts honor the journey and find the funny, because that's the only way I can live my life and sort of show up in the grief space. So, I mean, I've been giggling throughout this because that's just me. But I wonder, like, does anything come to mind when I say, like, where have you found the funny when it comes to grief, or not even from this conversation, but just like, and again, there's no rules here because you're the expert of your experience. So just like, yeah, you know, what's funny about death, or, you know, anything I'm open to.
Yeah, well, what comes to mind for me, this will be full circle back to my, you know, my current living experience with my dad. And, you know, really redefining that relationship with my dad, as he is pretty significantly brain damaged. And at the same time, it's taught me a lot of lessons, and he has made me laugh out loud more often than not. And I think part of the way I've been processing it, my sister and I have a thing, like we see my dad's personality emerging more and more, and it's emerging in a different way, but we're like, oh yeah, he's in there, because he will just say the funniest things that are things he used to say. So he'll be like, he'll just see something across the room, and out of the blue, he'll just go, well, holy shit. Like out of the blue. So now every time my sister and I like see something or like want to call something out, we just look at each other and we go, well, holy shit, and say it exactly like my dad. Or when he gets mad at something, he'll be like, I hope you have an explicit rating on your podcast, because I'm giving you all the zingers. Yeah, I'm giving you all the zingers. But the other thing is, when he gets mad, you're just like, out of the blue, he'll just turn and look at you, and he'll go, fuck. So like we've taken his language, and like as a family, because we also like that, like humor is how we get through everything. We've taken his language, and it has become our language and our lexicon for like how we react sometimes to situations. And it makes me appreciate him. And it makes me laugh, and it makes me love, and it makes me so grateful that he is still here. But that is the funny is how we see him reacting and expressing himself. And now we're all mimicking him.
I'm gonna have to get like the editors to like just take those two phrases as like, and I need like a button, because like it's like every time someone, it's so funny because I'm inviting people to obviously come on and honor their grief and tell, you know, and it like that weird feeling that I talk about comes up of like, say sorry for your loss, but like it's just not something that I like to say because it just was said to me so many times and it feels so weird. So I would love to just get a recording of your dad going
exactly,
just, you know, whatever, it's like, just, you know, because every grief story is heart-wrenching, just to be able to press that button. It's like yeah, that's just, you know, that's the true response sometimes. It's just, you know, it's
I
really
love
there.
that. I love
mean,
that.
I had
Well,
a
I'm going down
feeling
to Florida later this month. I will record something for you.
Yes, please. I want that for sure. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know that if I was to consciously check out, that I'm feeling a lot differently than I did when we started this. Definitely a lot lighter and just excited in a way that I was really not an hour ago. So I'm just so happy that we got to spend this time together. Please, as you check out, you're welcome to check out, and also just let us know where to find you, and anything that if they need more Shelley, which I'm sure they will, where to find you. Yeah,
so my checkout is, I feel more energized and less hungry. So this is good. I think my soul feels so nourished that my body's gonna maybe like back off for a minute.
I'm like, I love you, Shelley, but I'm still fucking hungry.
I said less hungry. I'm still.
And that's also
hungry.
The only reason I've stayed on time for these manageable, digestible food words. This podcast is so that I can still eat one more time before my fasting starts.
Oh my God, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Sorry.
I'm actually going to have lunch after that. Yeah, exactly. And where you can find me. So soulbatical.com is my website, soon to be shelleypaxton.com, but that's not until late May. Instagram is my playground, so at Soulbatical, and Soulbatical is the name of my book, which, like you said, you can find anywhere. It's spelled with 2 B's and 1 T. So that's where you can find me, at Soulbatical on Instagram, Shelley Paxton on LinkedIn. Yeah, and you can find my book anywhere. I did read my audiobook, so if you enjoyed this conversation and you truly want somebody like sitting next to you on the couch talking about my journey and reflecting on yours, get the audiobook. I think it's powerful. That's the feedback I've gotten.
No, I strongly recommend. Totally different experience, and just, yeah, it just feels like having you as a friend. And I would
love to connect. And if you want more little, soul bites from me on an ongoing basis, sign up for my newsletter on my website. So hopefully we can have a conversation, or DM me and say hi at the very least, because we're on this journey together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening, I'll put all of that in the notes, and please remember to honor the journey and find the funny wherever possible.
Well, Grief Club, that's the show. If you enjoyed it, please let us know by liking and leaving a review. This will help as many people who may need what we're talking about find it the fastest. Remember to honor the journey, and when that gets tough, find the funny.